king's eyes burned with anger. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. In front of him, Sister Chiamaka stood shaking, wrapped in her simple white cloth. 4 men pointed at her, shouting, "Your Majesty, she has done something terrible, something shameful, with an animal." Gasps filled the room. The villagers whispered in shock. The king's face grew even darker. "Sister Chiamaka," he said, his voice like ice, "tell me the truth. Did you do this?" The nun opened her mouth. But then something strange happened. Her eyes moved. Her trembling hand lifted and pointed at someone in the crowd. The whole court froze. Who was she pointing at? What secret was about to be revealed? Stay with me as we uncover the shocking truth and what happened next. A long time ago, in the kingdom of Umuna, there lived a kind nun named Sister Chiamaka. She was known for her gentle heart and love for people. She lived alone in a small house near the church, spending her days helping the sick, feeding the poor, and praying for the village. One day, 4 men, Emeka, Tunde, Bala, and Osaze, stormed into the king's palace. They fell to their knees before King Ifeanyi, their faces full of anger. "Your Majesty," Emeka shouted, "we have come to report a great sin." The king raised an eyebrow. "What sin?" Tunde pointed in the distance. "Sister Chiamaka. She has been doing terrible things with an animal. A dog." The court gasped. Whispers spread like wildfire. King Ifeanyi's face turned dark with anger. "Bring her to me at once." Guards rushed to Sister Chiamaka's home. She was inside, reading her Bible when they arrived. Without a word, they grabbed her arms and dragged her to the palace. Sister Chiamaka looked around in confusion. "What is happening? Why am I being taken?" But no one answered. Sister Chiamaka was dragged into the palace. Her feet barely touched the ground as the guards pulled her forward. The grand hall was packed with people. Villagers, palace guards, nobles, and elders, all gathered to witness what was about to unfold. The golden throne gleamed under the torchlight, and there sat King Ifeanyi, his face like stone, his eyes filled with judgment. The air was thick with tension. The 4 men, Emeka, Tunde, Bala, and Osaze, stood tall, their faces full of confidence. They had spoken, and now the king would pass judgment. Sister Chiamaka looked around, her heart pounding in her chest. The stares of the villagers burned into her skin like fire. They were not looking at her as a woman of God anymore. They were looking at her as a disgrace. The king leaned forward, his voice slow and powerful. "Sister Chiamaka, these men have accused you of a shameful act. Tell me the truth." A hush fell over the crowd. Sister Chiamaka's breath caught in her throat. For a moment she could not speak. Her lips trembled, her knees felt weak, but she had to defend herself. "Your Majesty, I have done nothing wrong. These are lies." The king's eyes narrowed. He studied her closely, looking for any sign of deception. He spoke again, his voice colder now. "If you are innocent, you will not fear an examination." A murmur spread through the court. Sister Chiamaka swallowed hard. An examination? Was this how far they would go? The king turned to the royal midwife, Mama Ngozi. "Examine her." Gasps echoed through the hall. Mama Ngozi, an elderly woman with years of wisdom, stepped forward. Her wrinkled hands were steady, her eyes sharp. She had seen many things in her life, but this was different. She reached for Sister Chiamaka's hand. "Come, my child," she whispered, leading her away. Sister Chiamaka followed, her heart racing. She had done nothing wrong, but she felt like a criminal walking to her execution. The court was silent as they waited. The only sound was the flickering of torches and the occasional whisper of the wind through the palace windows. Minutes passed. Then, at last, Mama Ngozi returned. Her face was pale, her lips pressed together as if she had seen a ghost. She walked slowly toward the king, her hands trembling. Then she bowed. "Your Majesty." She took a deep breath. "I have seen strange marks on her body." The moment those words left her lips, the courtroom exploded. Gasps, shouts, whispers. Fingers pointed at Sister Chiamaka. "Did you hear that? She has marks. Then it must be true." The king raised a hand, and silence fell once more. His gaze locked onto Sister Chiamaka, his voice dangerously low. "Why do you have these marks?" Sister Chiamaka's whole body felt cold. She looked down at her hands. They were shaking. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears. She had done nothing wrong. But how could she explain? Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Your Majesty, these marks, they are not what you think." But before she could finish, she stopped. Her breath hitched. Her eyes darted to the four men standing before the court. And then, something inside her shifted. A fire she did not know she had flared within her chest. She slowly lifted her head, her gaze locked onto one of the men. And then, her hand rose. Her finger pointed, steady and sure, straight at Emeka. The air turned thick, heavy, like a storm about to break. The crowd froze. The whispers stopped. A sharp intake of breath ran through the hall. Even the king stiffened. "The person who caused these marks," her voice, though shaking, was firm, "is standing right here." Every head turned to Emeka. He flinched. Sweat formed on his brow. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. The king's gaze darkened. He leaned forward, his expression unreadable. Then, in a voice that rumbled like thunder, he commanded, "Guards, bring these men forward." The four men stepped forward, their heads suddenly not so high, their backs not so straight. A silence like death filled the court. The king's voice cut through it like a blade. "Tell me the truth." His tone was no longer patient. "Did you falsely accuse this woman?" For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Bala cleared his throat, shifting on his feet. His voice, once loud and strong, was barely above a whisper now. "Your Majesty, we only repeated what we heard." A lie wrapped in cowardice. The king's brows furrowed. His voice rose. "Then tell me, who told you?" The men hesitated. The weight of the truth was too heavy for them to carry. Finally, Osazi, the weakest of them, muttered under his breath, "That person is in this court." A chill swept through the hall. The king slammed his fist against the arm of his throne. The sound echoed, making the chandeliers shake. "Bring him in." The guards turned, their heavy boots thudding against the floor. The doors opened, and in stepped a trembling man. His eyes darted around, looking for an escape that did not exist. The moment his foot crossed the threshold, the truth in his body betrayed him. His legs shook, his hands fidgeted, his lips quivered. The king's piercing gaze locked onto him, and in a voice that could make mountains tremble, he asked, "Are you the one who started this lie?" The court held its breath. The man swallowed hard. His mouth opened, then closed. His tongue felt too thick, his throat too dry. The truth was right in front of him, but he was too afraid to speak. The king's eyes burned with fury. "Then why are you shaking like a leaf?" The court held its breath. Finally, the king ordered, "Bring the dog into the court." Guards rushed out. Moments later, they returned with the dog. The king turned to the four men. "You say Sister Chiamaka had a dog? Tell me, what color was it?" Emeka spoke first. "Brown, Your Majesty." Tunde said, "No, black." Bala hesitated. White, Osaze whispered. Red. The court gasped. The king's eyes gleamed with knowing. Guards, show them the dog. The dog was neither brown, black, white, nor red. Its fur was a mixture of all colors. The court erupted in shock. The liars had been caught. The king's voice was like thunder. You have tried to destroy an innocent woman. Why? The men dropped to their knees, shaking. Your Majesty, forgive us, Emeka cried. Sister Chiamaka is a widow, young and beautiful. We wanted her, but she refused us. So we spread this lie to ruin her. The court gasped again. Tears filled Sister Chiamaka's eyes. I did nothing wrong. I only showed kindness. One day, I found a wounded puppy on the road. I picked it up, took it home, and cared for it. That is all. Her voice broke. But these men, they would not leave me alone. They whispered lies, threw stones at my home, called me names. I was afraid to even step outside. The king's hands curled into fists. You have falsely accused a pure woman. What do you deserve? The 4 men trembled. Mercy, Your Majesty, mercy. The king stood. His voice rang across the hall. You showed no mercy to her. You will receive no mercy from me. He turned to the villagers. Let all who spread lies know, justice will always find them. The villagers cheered. Justice had been served. And Sister Chiamaka, she was free. And so, the truth came out. This story teaches us a powerful lesson. Lies can destroy lives, but truth always finds a way. What would you do if you were in Sister Chiamaka's place? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe because the next story is even more shocking.